Welcome to the first class of SLHS 1301, the speech chain. So SLHS 1301 is all about different parts of the physical, linguistic, and perceptual concepts related to spoken language. And the speech chain is a good place to start because it's the overview of thinking about it as a whole system. So broadly speaking, this course will provide you with a background of, like I said, the physical, linguistic, perceptual concepts related to spoken language. And that includes measuring physical things, measuring the acoustics of speech, measuring speech waveforms, understanding how they travel through space, or travel through the air or other media from person to person, and thinking about how the listener will perceive those sounds, what are the organizational principles behind speech. So we're going to explore that in a physical nature, so that we don't think about speech as this ethereal thing that just happens, but something that can actually be studied scientifically. Just to introduce you to how I approach teaching, my values are listed on the screen here. So I want you to be in a position where you can know something deeply and you can teach it to someone else, even if they have no background. I want you to be able to translate a lot of concepts into your own words rather than just memorize things, because that's really a good sign that you really deeply know it. A really important part of knowledge is not just knowing the facts that are true, but being able to recognize what's not true and anticipating some common misperceptions that people have. So one of the interesting things you learn as you study something more and more deeply is that the general public might misunderstand it, and you want to understand where those misperceptions come from and how to correct them. I'm going to give you, an overview course because this is just a 1,000 level course. So there will be some simplicity to it so that you can be confident that you really know what the material is. But at the same time, we're just scratching the surface of something that has a lot of complexity. So peppered throughout the semester, I'm going to be giving you some more complex examples of concepts, just to to promote some inspiration, to give you a little sense of wonder, which I think is important in my teaching. So one thing that's really separate from the knowledge base is actually going through the class. And I want you to get a chance to learn from any mistakes that you make without worrying that it's going to harm your grades. So in a lot of our classes, after this first one, we're going to have in-class question and answers. There's going to be discussion sections, lab sections that allow you to test your knowledge before you get to the exam, so you can build some confidence that you know the material there. On the exams, I like to give lots of different kinds of questions. Some people are really good at multiple choice. Some people are good at writing essays. Other people are good at, different kinds of assessments, drawing diagrams, interpreting diagrams. So I like to have a variety of different things so that, you can find your strength and express that on the exam rather than having to tailor your style to, a very narrow style that fits mine. Especially in the labs, we're going to try to enable you to use these class topics to learn about more general things. So even though we're going to talk about, the physics of speech, we're hoping that you're going to learn something that you can apply more generally to your life. In some cases, this is going to be easy to know because you're going to work on writing skills, and in your lab writing, you're going to work out your reasoning behind your problem sets. You're going to learn how to communicate complex thoughts verbally. So those are the most tangible skills that we're going to think about. But like I said before, you're going to think about how another person sees the world and how you might approach something scientifically, even though it's not something you intuitively think about. And finally, my teaching value, which is a little bit easier to do in person, is seeing the thinking process. So what you'll see is, starting from a blank slate, I want you to get a sense of thinking about an idea, connecting it with other ideas, going through trial and error, and knowing that, even the people who write your textbooks, even your professors, we start with things, we make mistakes, we tailor our thoughts, we correct our thoughts, and then we finally arrive at an answer and an understanding. And I think that seeing that whole process play through can be really valuable. As opposed to just seeing the final product, seeing the whole process that led up to it can not only give you an appreciation of how hard it was, but also maybe put you at ease, because if you don't get something right away, even the experts don't get something right away. So I hope to channel these teaching values throughout the whole semester, and maybe even pick up a few new ones as we go along. In this class, participation is going to look a lot different than in a live class discussion. And so the main way you're going to participate is by using this system called Chime In 2. This is a system that was developed at the U of M so that you can use a device to, respond to in-class questions in real time. And so I can get a sense of, what the general level of understanding is. So you can read a lot more about this in the syllabus, and I went over it in the syllabus video. This is just a reminder that what we're going to think about is, looking at questions. This is a question from later in the semester. If I ask you, frequency tuning is accomplished by what? And I give you some choices like the eardrum, the outer hair cells, inner hair cells, the auditory nerve. I'll pose this question, and then after collecting your responses, I can see that, a plurality of you have known that the outer hair cells do this, but maybe a substantial number of students think that the inner hair cells do this. So I will spend an extra moment just to make sure that we disentangle those concepts, and so that everyone understands that. So, there could be different kinds of questions. There could be multiple choice questions. There could be questions where you click on a diagram or write in a whole answer, or whether it be words or numbers. So you'll see a variety of these kinds of questions. And as I said in the syllabus video, this provides a lot of added value for a lot of us. Speech is obviously not the only form of communication, and this is a class primarily about speech itself. So we're not going to be thinking about, ways that we communicate via text or sign language, or other kinds of gestures or facial expressions, other kinds of expressions, through Morse code or other kinds of flag codes, or just, other kinds of expressions you might have. We're thinking primarily about the act of producing sound with your vocal tract. And there are some interesting things to think about in terms of how speech is different from all of these, particularly how it's different from written language. Speech has a lot of advantages over written language, primarily in terms of speed. So some people can type very fast, but nobody can type as fast as people speak, in terms of writing down all the actual words. People can speak generally about 4 to 7 syllables per second, which calculates to be around 135 words a minute at a normal rate. There are people who can certainly speak a lot faster than that, and I invite you to click on the link here as you download the lecture slides to see a video of a speed talker. And people who participate in debates certainly speak very quickly as well. So this by a large margin, surpasses the speed that we can get by writing or even typing. There are 2 other advantages of speech, of spoken language, that we want to highlight here, which are the robustness and the variety. So by robustness, I mean that even in a challenging situation, the system works. So if speech is spoken at a fast or a slow rate, if there's background noise, if there are other talkers around, if you're in a room that has a lot of reverberation, if someone's just whispering, if you're encountering a person you've never spoken with before, you can still typically understand them. So I'll play a few examples here. So here I'm using some software that all of you will become familiar with throughout the course of the semester. This is called Prot. We can use this to just open up some speech and play it. So I have a sentence here that I've processed in a lot of different ways. Here's the original one.
At that high level, the air is pure.
And we can listen to it spoken at a faster rate.
At that high level, the air is pure.
Or a really slow rate.
At that high level, the air is pure.
And what's interesting about this is that when you unpack the original signal, we can go in and measure things that should correspond to particular speech sounds. Here's one. Here's the in level. And you can see that it has particular frequencies in a particular duration. We'll learn more about how to measure that later in the semester. But as it turns out, even though we can measure these things, we can also change those. And of course, every talker has, their own sound. And changing that duration dramatically doesn't appear to change our understanding. We can put some background noise in this.
At that high level, the air is pure.
And still hear the sentence. We can also put a different kind of noise in here, which is just modulated noise.
At that high level, the air is pure.
And what we're doing here with the noise is making sure that the amplitude fluctuations actually appear like they're speech, but of course it doesn't sound like speech. It just sounds like noise. You can do lots of different kinds of reverberation in speech.
At that high level, the air is pure.
So we're essentially spreading it across time here. And notice, no matter what I'm doing, this is still understandable. This is a whispered version.
At that high level, the air is pure.
And finally, what we call a vocoded version. So this is where we're separating all the different frequencies in the sound and transmitting those using a different carrier.
At that high level, the air is pure.
So you can use this to generate computer speech or robotic speech. So what's interesting about this and the main principle that we want to get across is that speech is robust to all these things that might otherwise degrade it. So we said that speech is robust, but it also has a lot of variety, and that variety can be used to highlight differences that are difficult to convey just by text. So if you speak with a particular dialect that expresses the region of the country or region of the world that you come from, you can express that in your speech. If you're speaking with a different tone of voice or trying to express sarcasm or the fact that you're happy or upset, you can express that with spoken language a lot more easily than with text. There are ways that you can express your cultural identity as well. And so we'll be thinking about and talking about these things later in the semester when we think about how people express their gender and their dialect, their region, their social groups through their speech. An analogy you can make is using different fonts when you're typing, right? So we're saying that speech has a lot of variety and that we can use this intentionally. And this is really why we have all these different fonts, right? To convey something about the mood that we're trying to express using our text. And we know that these matter, right? Because depending on how you write something, it can be perceived very differently. So let's go back to the speech chain. What we're going to think about now is some of the basic principles that are useful just in terms of laying the groundwork for understanding the concepts in this class. Communication requires at least 3 different components. There's a source, there's a transmitting medium or the communication channel, and a destination where it's going. So if you are missing any of these, then you aren't really successfully communicating. If you have a source and a destination, you need something in between them to carry that message. And that's something that is sometimes left out of the picture, but we'll see, especially in the coming weeks, after we lay the groundwork here, how the properties of the air around us really play a very large role in the transmission of speech. The speech chain itself is typically drawn in this way. So we're thinking about this going from left to right. Here's the speaker, the talker here. There's obviously a brain that is controlling the vocal muscles. It's thinking about the message that it wants to convey. Now, when you speak, when you articulate and phonate your voice, you're producing disturbances in the air around you, and that will produce sound waves. Now, we draw them this way, but we'll understand as this course goes on how this is just a representation of something that is quite a bit more complicated. The ear will take that and decode it using a system, especially the inner ear will break down all the components of that sound and send those components up to the brain so that the person can understand what you said. Now, a part that's often left out of this picture is the fact that the talker's ear is also part of this system, right? So as you're listening to yourself, You're constantly monitoring how you're speaking to make sure it's the right volume, the right pitch, you're hitting all the right speech sounds. And so that's an important part, this feedback link. And so we'll see some examples of why we know this is true. So when we think about communication, it's kind of in the abstract, but we think about speech in particular, the source is the talker, right? And we can think about this at an abstract level. We can think about it as a physical thing, because we have muscles and articulators. Now, the communication channel, the medium, is the air around us. Typically, I mean, unless you're, diving underwater and trying to bubble out some words under there, typically we're communicating with air around us. And so the properties of that air are our medium. And finally, the destination is the person we're thinking about. We have to consider their auditory system and their brain, and also what kind of linguistic knowledge they bring to the table. Because if you have a person that you're talking to and they don't speak English, then you're not going to be successfully communicating if what you're doing is speaking English. So how do we know that the talker's ear is part of the chain? Well, one way is what we call the Lombard effect. So I invite you to look at these videos here. The short story is that if you're in a loud crowd, think about what this person is doing, making their voice louder. And what you're doing is not only helping the listener, but helping yourself monitor your own speech by speaking above the level of the background noise. So if you're in a louder place, you'll speak more loudly. That's one of the ways we know that how you're hearing impacts your own speech. Another interesting example is called the delayed auditory feedback effect. This is when you speak and the sound of your own voice is delivered back to your ears, but with a little bit of delay. And when you click on these videos, you'll see that this can actually disturb your speech so much that people are unable to speak. Incidentally, this is also used as a treatment for people who are stuttering. And so this delayed auditory feedback can help them become more fluent in some situations. In this class, we're going to think about the physical, the acoustic, and the auditory. So these are just different levels of understanding of the same process. So when you think about speech, you can think about, the musculature involved, the movements of the tongue and the jaw and the lips. You can also think about measuring the acoustic changes in the air around us. You can also think about how those changes are encoded by the brain. So we'll go over all of those in the midst of this class. So in the coming weeks, we're going to talk about how we organize speech into categories. That's our next chapter on linguistic organization. Then we'll move on to understanding the physical medium around us, the physical process of producing speech, and measuring the acoustics. And later in the semester, we'll think about how those signals are decoded by the ear and processed by the brain.